This is not a fairy tale where evil is destroyed and happiness arrives instantly. This is a journey marked by blood, tears, and scars, both on the skin and in the heart. It began with a so-called family tradition that seemed harmless and ended in a courtroom where kinship, marriage, and honor were torn apart. I am not writing this story to seek pity. I am writing it so that anyone who is a parent, a grandparent, or simply someone who has ever loved a child will remember this love never means control, and there is no such thing as a tradition that has the right to stand above a child's safety. Chapter 1. The Tattoo Ritual Family and the First Shock used to think a body covered in tattoos meant individuality, uniqueness, art. Then I met my boyfriend's family, now my ex-husband's family, and realized that when something is pushed into becoming a ritual, it's no longer a hobby. It's a religion. He grew up in a family that believed the body is a canvas. From wrists to ankles, from shoulders to the nape, everyone was covered in Japanese sleeves, dragons, waves, masks, peonies. They proudly spoke about the burden of fame, how exhausting it was to always be stared at wherever they went. The way they said it made it obvious they were savoring every one of those stares. Some even had tattoos on their faces. The family photo hung in the living room, a sea of ink, everyone grinning as if flaunting their achievements like the cover of some underground magazine. Then he took me home to meet them. Me, a Japanese girl without a single mark. Not because I hated tattoos, but because my body was my body. That was it. I immediately noticed something off in his mother's smile, polite, warm enough, but her eyes flicked over my bare arms like she was checking a piece of outdated furniture. For the heavily tattooed daughters and sons-in-law, she hugged tightly, squealed, took photos. With me, she smiled, with distance. I said nothing. I didn't mention how their so-called Japanese designs strayed so far from the spirit I actually knew. I chose polite silence. But when I got pregnant, the icy wall between my mother-in-law and me cracked. She suddenly became friendlier, asked after me more often, praised me as strong fitting into the family. Each time, though, she slipped in a vague line, I hope the baby will be raised in our family's tradition. I pretended to misunderstand. Yes, of course he'll love your sushi. So bad it was an insult to taste buds, but I still smiled. My son was born 3 years ago, half Japanese, half American, big-eyed, with that soft baby scent at the nape of his neck. And of course, no tattoos. My husband, amidst that forest of tradition, was the only one who stayed rational. Kids aren't canvases. We had never once fought about it. Everything was calm. Until the day it all shattered. That day, my family across the state had an emergency. I had to leave immediately. My husband was stuck in an important meeting. I hesitated for a second, then called my mother-in-law to see if she could babysit for a few hours. Normally, she hated babysitting, always found excuses to refuse. This time, she agreed, instantly. Enthusiastically, unnaturally so? I should have known. But when your parents say we need you, your heart doesn't leave you much time to analyze. I waited until she arrived, gave instructions about allergy meds, meal schedule, then rushed off. On the road, my husband texted, "Everything's fine, don't worry." A few more messages like that. I felt reassured until he called, just as I was backing out of my parents' driveway, his voice low. "Our son will be okay, but come home right now. I don't want to say this over the phone and make you panic. Do you know the feeling of your heart dropping into your stomach? I could hear the roar of the engine inside my head. I sped like a thief, escaping from my own home. The key nearly snapped in my hand as I opened the door. My husband was standing in our son's room looking down at the little bed. I rushed over. My son was sleeping fitfully, every breath a small frown. I pulled back his collar. A red-blue dragon, clumsy and uneven, like someone's botched art assignment, sat on his neck. The skin around it swollen, raw, oozing. No plastic wrap. No ointment. No sign of any sanitary procedure. I didn't need a doctor to know this was a crime. My father had been a tattoo artist. I grew up around needles, ink, antiseptic. What was on my son's neck was a garage practice session, nothing more. My whole body turned to cold metal. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to hurl every object in the house out the window. I looked at my husband. He said Mom thought she was welcoming the child into the family in our way. Maybe his skin is just reacting a bit. Reacting? I laughed hoarsely. A normal reaction to filth. The word filth left my tongue like shattered glass. There are moments when you understand why people say heart-wrenching. I was right there looking at my 3-year-old with a mark he had never chosen, never been asked about, never been explained to. An inked statement that screamed, "You do not belong to yourself. You belong to us." I lifted him. He stirred weakly, whimpered like a kitten, pulled his neck away from my hand. In pain, on the way to the ER, I sat in the back seat holding him, counting each traffic light like counting my own heartbeat. The doctor cleaned the wound, checked for infection, prescribed antibiotics. "He'll be fine," they said. But the tattoo won't go away. The bluntness hit the floor like a nail. On the drive back, I watched him sleep, tear streaks dried on his cheeks. I had always thought of myself as gentle, conciliatory, conflict-avoiding. At that moment, another self inside me opened its eyes. Not because I hated tattoos. I hated the theft. I hated how adults called control tradition obsession, love violation, a belonging ritual. And most of all, I hated that someone thought they had the right to sign their name on my child's body. Back home, I laid him in bed, pulled the blanket high over his neck. My husband leaned in the doorway, eyes red, mumbling something about talking to Mom. I heard my own voice reply with chilling calm. Not talking. Taking responsibility. I went to the kitchen to find the insurance card. My hands shook so hard, I dropped a ceramic bowl my mother-in-law had given me at the baby shower. It shattered. Among the shards, a memory card slipped out small, black, lying still like some hidden eye. I picked it up. Heavier than it should have been. What was inside photos, videos? Some plan I didn't know. Only this, at the end of every violent tradition, there's always evidence if you stay calm enough to gather the pieces. That night, when my son's fever subsided, I sat in a corner of the room, the smell of antiseptic still lingering on the towel. In the living room, their family photo hung a sea of ink and smug smiles. I almost laughed all those years of bragging about freedom of expression, yet what they did to my son was strip away choice stamp ownership. What kind of freedom starts by silencing a child? I turned off the light. In the dark, I listened to my son's breathing grow steady. I thought of my mother-in-law, the way she had looked at me that first time, the unnatural eagerness when she agreed to babysit. I thought of all the times I pretended not to understand the tradition she mentioned. Maybe I had understood. I had just hoped I was wrong. Tomorrow morning I will start making calls. Dermatologist, lawyer, preschool, anyone connected to my son's medical records. I will check that memory card. I will go through the baby monitor footage, purchase history, old texts, not to win. But so for the first time, someone will have to call this by its true name. My son is 3 years old. On his neck lies a dragon he never chose. And that was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Truth Exposed and the Family Confrontation. I thought that, after taking my son to the ER, everything would be clear. The boy had been harmed, the culprit was his grandmother, and everyone would stand with me to protect him. I was naive. In this family, what's right isn't what matters. Tradition is king. When we came back home from the hospital, my son fell asleep on my shoulder, still wincing in pain now and then. I laid him down on the bed, pulled his collar aside so my husband could see clearly. He stood there torn, and then said something that nearly made me collapse. "I'll talk to Mom." "Talk?" I laughed bitterly. "Talk? Our child just got tattooed on the neck by an obsessive old woman, and you call that talking?" He stayed silent, and honestly, that silence hurt more than any argument. Because it exposed his real fear. He was more afraid of confronting his mother than of losing his son. That evening, my mother-in-law called on video. I put it on speaker. She acted calm, as if she had just taken her grandson to the park, not as if she had forced a needle into his skin. Don't blow this out of proportion. At his age, a little tattoo won't affect anything. He'll grow up proud to be part of the family. I nearly smashed the phone. I asked, "Do you know he had a fever? His skin is infected." And the doctor said, "This could leave permanent scars." She laughed that sour laugh. "A small fever, it'll pass. Scars make it better. He'll be our little warrior." At that moment, I understood to her, my son wasn't a child. He was a trophy to display in her sick cabinet of traditions. I slammed the table. "I'll sue. I'll make sure you never get near my son again." My husband jerked his head toward me. "If you do that, this marriage won't survive." There was a moment I looked straight into his eyes. This man who once swore to protect me and our child. I pointed toward the door. "Then you know where it is." No more words. Only a heavy silence filling the room, my ragged breathing, and the painful shifting of my son in his sleep. I thought we had already hit rock bottom, but no. The next day I discovered something that made my hands tremble with both fear and rage. While cleaning up the shards of the broken ceramic bowl from last night, I picked up the memory card hidden inside it. The question drilled into my head. Why would she hide it inside a gift meant for her grandson? While my husband fumbled with calls to his mother, I clenched that memory card tight in my hand. A piece of evidence. A secret. Maybe the very thing that could unravel everything. Only that then did I realize this wasn't a family conflict anymore. This was a battlefield. And I once, the quiet mother who avoided confrontation, had officially become the one standing against the entire system my mother-in-law had built. And this was only the beginning of the war. Chapter 3, Social Media Erupts and the Victim Grandmother Act. If I thought that after the fiery confrontation at home, things would neatly move toward the legal route, I had forgotten about a weapon far more dangerous than any courtroom, my mother-in-law's Facebook. The next morning, while I was making coffee with shaky, sleepless hands, my phone blew up with dozens of notifications. A friend sent me a link. "Did your mother-in-law just post this?" I opened it. A post a whole page long. Being a grandmother is hard. I only wanted my grandson to feel loved, to be welcome, just like all the other grandchildren in the family. But my daughter-in-law says my love is a crime. I'm old now, weak at heart. I just wanted to do one last thing to unite the family. Perhaps I was wrong for loving too much. The photo attached was an old picture, her holding my son in her arms, both of them smiling. And beneath it, 47 care reactions in less than an hour. The first comment, "What kind of mother is so heartless, cutting off the bond between grandmother and grandchild over something so small?" Another, "We tattoo our own bodies all the time, and it's fine. Why make it so hard on a grandmother who only wants to pass down tradition?" I wanted to throw my phone at the wall. Something small? A 3-year-old with a swollen red neck, crying in pain, that's small? Worse, my husband's relatives started sharing the post. His sister-in-law commented, "We all know she's just a bit overly sensitive. Poor mom." An uncle dropped a clapping emoji. Even the neighbors chimed in. "She's always been so kind. Always baked cookies for the kids around here. I don't believe she could ever do anything bad." While I was bandaging the wound on my son's neck, the entire online world was being built into a wall of support around the victim grandmother. The breaking point was when I ran into her in person. I was picking up antibiotics for my son. He was running a low fever face, flushed, leaning on my shoulder. And right at the counter next to me, who stood there? Her, calmly signing for her heart medication, as if nothing had happened. I exploded. I shouted at her in front of the entire pharmacy. "What did you do to my son? You tattooed his neck." like he was an object. Do you even know how much pain he's in? She turned eyes glistening with tears, like some award-winning actress. I only wanted to love my grandson. I only wanted him not to feel left out. My daughter-in-law, well, you all see it, she's always overreacting. And just like that, the whole pharmacy pulled out their phones to record. In the video, you'd see a trembling old woman with watery eyes clutching her heart medicine bag, and a young mother hair, messy dark circles under her eyes screaming like a lunatic. Guess which clip spread faster online? That afternoon, just as I laid my son down to rest, my phone buzzed again. A notification in the family group chat. We all know our daughter-in-law has mental issues. Remember that time she panicked at the playground last year? The kid only fell a little and she acted like it was the end of the world. I wanted to scream. They were digging up every scrap, every anxious moment of mine to build a narrative that I wasn't a mother protecting her child, but a mentally unstable woman tearing the family apart. That night, as my son's fever spiked higher, I sat by his bed with the memory card in my hand, the one my mother-in-law had hidden inside that ceramic bowl. Tiny as it was, I knew it could hold the truth. The question was, would I manage to bring that truth to light before the entire family, the entire community, branded me as the crazy mom? One thing I knew for certain, this fight was no longer just about protecting my son. It had become a fight to claim the right to be seen as a normal, sane, rightful mother. And in that fight, my mother-in-law had already played her first move, casting me as the villain in the public eye. But I had found the first piece of the truth, a mysterious memory card. Chapter 4. The Investigation and Gathering Evidence. I used to think being a mother meant feeding your child, taking them for vaccinations, lulling them to sleep. But ever since my son was illegally tattooed on his neck, I suddenly became an unwilling detective. The memory card that had fallen out of the broken ceramic bowl lay in my hand, like a challenge. Do you dare to open me? I sat alone in the living room, the dim blue glow of my laptop screen lighting up my hollow face. My son slept fitfully, sometimes whimpering from the pain of his wound. I slid the card into the slot. My heart pounded like war drums. Inside it wasn't family photos or music. It was a series of video files. I clicked one at random, and there it was, footage of a familiar living room, my mother-in-law's house. She sat with several relatives laughing, discussing the ritual of marking the new generation. The next one will be the half-Japanese boy. Light skin the ink will really pop. We have to do it before he's old enough to resist, otherwise it'll be hard to keep him still. My stomach flipped inside out. They were talking about tattooing my child's skin the way others plan a weekend BBQ. And that was only the first video. In the others, I saw them showing off tattoos, talking in coded language about appointments, even a recording of another child, a relative crying hysterically while being held down. A man held the tattoo gun while the adults around clapped and cheered. "Good job, brave kid, don't cry. You'll be so proud later." I slammed the laptop shut. I was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. If someone told me this was a horror film, I would have accepted it more easily than the truth an entire family had turned mutilating children's bodies into a prideful ritual. The next day, I secretly checked the account for our baby monitor. I remembered once showing my mother-in-law how to use the app. I opened the storage history, and sure enough, there was a clip from 2 a.m. a few weeks back. My mother-in-law stood in my son's room, leaning close to his ear, whispering, "You will become one of us. The dragon will protect you, my sweet boy." The sound pierced my ears like a needle. My son was only 3, breathing softly in his sleep, unaware that a curse was being poured into him. I began gathering everything. Screenshots of the video clips. Saved Facebook messages from the family group where they called tattooing tradition. Amazon purchase history still logged in on my child's iPad, a tattoo gun practice skin and a jar labeled numbing cream for infants. Yes, you read that right. Numbing cream for infants, which meant they had planned this long ago, even preparing drugs to make their actions gentler. I brought the evidence to my husband. His face went pale, but instead of rage like mine, he just sat frozen, head in his hands. Once saw a box of tattoo needles in Mom's room. I thought she just kept them for old times' sake. I didn't believe she would actually use them on our son. I looked at him with both pity and fury. This man, the father of my child, had seen the warning signs and chose to ignore them. For what? To keep the peace. To spare his mother's feelings. He sighed, whispering, "Maybe it's best if you don't make this a big deal. My family won't let it go." I answered in a voice cold as ice. "It became a big deal the moment your mother drove a needle into our son's skin, and I'll make it even bigger." That night, I printed every photo, every receipt, every chat log. The dining table turned into a war room covered in papers and notes. I was no longer the silent daughter-in-law. I was a mother preparing to drag an entire sick network into the light. But as I arranged the evidence, one chilling thought flickered across my mind. How many in the community already knew and stayed silent? Because if this ritual had been practiced for 2 generations, then how many other children carried dragons? Tigers' demons on their skin marks they never chose. And I knew it was time to act. Because if I didn't stand up, my son would only be one among countless victims of tradition. Chapter 5: A Family Shattered and the Crushing Isolation. I once believed that as long as I held the truth in my hands, everything would be resolved. My biggest mistake was forgetting that in a family accustomed to living by a script of lies, the truth doesn't scare them. It only drives them to unite and attack you harder. Right after I gathered the evidence from the memory card, the baby monitor, and the Amazon history, I began sharing it with a few of my husband's relatives whom I still trusted. Their reactions were not what I expected. One cousin watched, shook her head. "I don't deny it's bad, but you're tearing this family apart." An uncle messaged me, "This should be handled inside the family. Taking it outside will just make us a laughingstock." While I thought they would be shocked and angry, all they cared about was one thing: preserving family honor. My son had been tattooed without consent, and yet their biggest worry was what the neighbors would say. Social media was even worse. After the pharmacy incident, the footage of me screaming was still being shared with captions like "Unstable mother destroys grandmother-grandchild bond." The local mom groups in my neighborhood, where I was once considered a reliable friend, turned cold. One time, when I carried my son to the park, a few mothers pulled their kids away. I overheard a whisper, "That's the crazy mom who made a scene about a tattoo." The label "crazy" stuck to my forehead faster than any court order ever could. My husband grew more distant. He read the evidence, knew his mother had committed a crime, but kept repeating, "I don't want our son growing up in a broken family." Isn't there a gentler way? Gentler, I wanted to laugh, but I had no strength left. Every time I changed the bandage, my son whimpered and cried, and all his father thought about was not disgracing the family. One night, as I was folding legal documents, he muttered, "Sometimes I think you want to beat my mother more than you want to protect our child." I turned, looked him straight in the eye. "If you think protecting our child is secondary and protecting the family's reputation is primary, then maybe you should move back in with your mother." He didn't reply. But the next morning he slept on the sofa. I began to understand what isolation really meant. Close friends stayed silent. One old friend messaged bluntly, "I believe you, but my husband told me not to get involved. I have small kids. I can't risk it." At the hospital where I worked, colleagues whispered behind my back. A young doctor looked at me, half joking, half serious. "I heard you're suing your mother-in-law over a tattoo. That's intense. I just hope you're okay mentally." They didn't see the wound on my son's neck. They only saw a hysterical mother making a fuss. The breaking point came when I got a note from preschool. The teacher had written, "During circle time, the child said, 'Mom says Grandma is dangerous, but Grandma feels warm.' Observation, possible signs of family environment conflict." I held the note with trembling hands. Even my 3-year-old was being turned into a witness against me. My husband's family had officially launched a full-on campaign. In the group chat, they dug up every tiny detail to brand me unstable, how I panicked when my son fell at the playground, how I once called the doctor at midnight over a mild fever. Every protective action I took was twisted into proof that I was a hysterical mother. I was being pushed into the role of villain in the very story where I was the victim. Some nights, I sat watching my son sleep, the dragon mark still raw on his neck. I whispered, "I'm here, and I won't let anyone erase your right to be yourself." But deep down, I knew I was standing alone against an entire family, against an entire community. And the worst fear slowly crept into my mind. If they had enough power to brand me insane in everyone's eyes, how much longer could I keep my son? I understood then that the battle was no longer just against my mother-in-law. It was against an entire system that had long disguised the destruction of children as love. And I alone was about to step into both a courtroom of law and the court of public opinion. Chapter 6: The Courtroom and a Shocking Verdict. If I once thought social media was the fiercest battlefield, the first court hearing taught me what it truly meant to have every vein dissected in public. On the day of trial, I walked into the courtroom carrying a file thick as a pillow. Photos of the swollen wound on my son's neck, antibiotic prescriptions, printed footage from the baby monitor, my mother-in-law's Amazon order history, left open on the iPad, and the fateful memory card. I brought it all because I knew that if even one detail was missing, I'd be branded once again as the unstable mother. Across from me, my mother-in-law sat small in her chair, pastel scarf draped around her shoulders, eyes brimming with tears, a packet of tissues in her hands. She looked around like a pitiful victim betrayed by her own family. Behind her sat her fan club, my sister-in-law, relatives, a few neighbors, an entire cheer squad for the script of the kind grandmother cruelly dragged to court by her ruthless daughter-in-law. Her lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor, this is not an assault case. This is a cultural misunderstanding. This family has a tradition of tattooing that goes back generations. My client merely wanted her grandson to feel included, to feel he belonged." The blood boiled in my veins. Tattooing the skin of a 3-year-old without consent was being framed as inclusion. I shot up, nearly shouting, "Inclusion." My son had a high fever, his skin infected. Doctors had to prescribe antibiotics, and they even found infant numbing cream in her Amazon orders. This is what you call inclusion. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some whispered, others stared at me like I was hysterical. But when my lawyer laid out the evidence, the air shifted. The memory card was projected onto the screen, footage of my mother-in-law and relatives laughing, discussing the marking of the new generation. The words, "Tattoo him before he's old enough to resist," echoed through the room. I looked around. Some relatives shrank back, avoiding eye contact. The mask of cultural tradition was cracking. Then came the tattoo artist's testimony. At first he hesitated, but when threatened with losing his license, he confessed, "She brought the boy. He was asleep." I refused, said it wasn't legal without parental consent, but she shoved triple the cash at me. I was stupid and agreed. A direct punch through the wall of her carefully built narrative. But the real climax was the dermatologist's testimony. The tattoo ink contained metals the child is allergic to. This is not just a surface wound. If the reaction had been worse, it could have caused cardiovascular complications. In other words, the child's life was put in danger. The room fell dead silent. Even some of her supporters held their breath. Her lawyer scrambled to recover. "Your Honor, this was not malice, but misunderstood love. My client merely wanted to preserve family heritage." I almost laughed. What kind of love ignores allergy warnings, ignores health, ignores parental consent? What kind of love requires metal needles and cash bribes? Finally, the verdict was delivered. The judge's voice was firm. Cutting no tradition can justify the violation of a child's body. The court finds the defendant guilty assault child endangerment and performing an unauthorized medical procedure. The room erupted. Some relatives wept. My mother-in-law collapsed into her chair, clutching her tissues, face pale as chalk. I had hoped for a harsh sentence, but reality left a bitter taste. Because of her age and heart condition, she would not serve prison time. Instead, the court ordered 2 years of probation, mandatory psychological therapy parenting classes, and a ban on unsupervised contact with her grandson. A part of me wanted to scream. That's it. A permanent tattoo on my son's neck, traded for a few therapy sessions. But then I looked at my son sitting in his father's lap, eyes tired as neck, still wrapped in bandages. I understood this victory wasn't for me to gloat. It was to protect him from the next time. As we left the courtroom, my husband walked silently beside me. He no longer defended, no longer made excuses for his mother, but his eyes were empty. During a recess, he filed for separation, a thin sheet of paper, but it cut away the last fragile tie between us. The family was broken. The verdict was shocking, but it was only the opening act. Now I had to learn how to live in a world where every gaze followed me, waiting to see if I would stand firm or collapse. I walked out of court holding my son and told myself this was not the end. This was only the second stage of the battle fighting to heal. Chapter 7. After the trial, divorce. Custody and rebuilding life. If the trial felt like an earthquake, the days that followed were the aftershocks that refused to end. The house I once called a home was now split in two one-half, for me and my son the other, for memories rotting away with my ex-husband and his mother. Divorce, the predicted ending. Right after the verdict was announced, my husband quietly filed for divorce. There was no fiery argument, no tears, no apology. Just a stack of papers slid across the table as if we were signing a utility contract. In the petition, the reason was neatly written, irreconcilable differences. I stared at the line, half laughing, half bitter. Irreconcilable differences. Yes, because how do you reconcile keeping our child safe with protecting mom's honor custody? An uneven battle. My husband didn't fight for custody, but his family did. They threw everything at me, claims that I was mentally unstable, too hysterical and damaging to the child, isolating myself from family. I once thought I might lose everything, but in the end, the court ruled I was granted primary custody. My ex-husband was allowed supervised visitation until he could prove he had completely cut ties with his mother's influence. My mother-in-law, she was barred from all private contact, permitted only supervised visits after completing mandatory therapy. When I heard the ruling, I broke down in tears, not from joy, but from sheer relief. After months of fighting, my son finally had legal safety around him. Rebuilding, rising from the rubble divorce, meant starting over from scratch. My bank account was nearly empty after paying lawyer fees. My job at the hospital had become unstable from all the online drama. I moved into a small apartment, painted the walls a soft yellow to make it feel warm. My son began play therapy. Each session, he drew a black dragon with a marker, then rubbed at it with an eraser until the paper tore. The therapist explained it was his way of confronting the dragon on his neck. Hearing that made my chest ache. I attended a class called Parenting with Body Respect. We learned the smallest things, asking your child before hugging, letting them pick their clothes, allowing them to decide whether they wanted a haircut. Every small gesture was my way of returning to him the control his grandmother had stolen. The cracks in society friends. Some stayed silent. A few who once turned their backs sent apologetic messages, but the wounds in me weren't ready to forgive. At the hospital, I was reassigned to a different department away from colleagues who had mocked me, starting again from zero, but at least in a place where I could breathe. My own family slowly returned to my side. My parents drove hours to visit their grandson, bringing food blankets. They no longer scolded me for being too harsh. They just hugged me and said, "You did what needed to be done." A quiet victory. One evening, my son tilted his neck toward the mirror and asked Mom, "When will the dragon go away?" I didn't cry. I sat down, looked him in the eye, and said, "You don't need the dragon to go away. You'll decide when you want to keep it or erase it. It's your body." He nodded, then ran off to grab a sticker to place over the tattoo. A tiny blue butterfly. And for the first time in months, I saw him truly smile. I realized I had lost many things: my marriage, my reputation, and my savings, but what I had kept was the most important of all: my son's freedom and his safety. As healing, the final message. After every storm comes the gray days. But even in the gray, if you look closely and patiently enough, there are glimmers of light. That was the journey for me and my son in the years after the trial. My son's healing journey. At each therapy session, my son added another sticker over the tattoo. One day it was a superhero, another day a race car, sometimes a bright red heart. He turned the wound into a canvas that changed daily, and it made me realize something: children have a magical strength, the ability to turn pain into creativity. When he called the tattoo on his neck his warrior mark, I didn't correct him. Instead of seeing it as a stain, we transformed it together into a symbol of survival. He would grow up not with shame, but with the story of how he was strong enough to endure. My own healing. I joined a support group for parents whose children had experienced bodily violations. We shared advice: how to face the scrutiny of others and how to rebuild trust for our kids. There, I was no longer the hysterical mom, but a mother who had fought for her child. I also learned to forgive not my mother-in-law; she would have to face her own consequences in therapy, but myself. To forgive the helplessness of the day I handed my son to her. To forgive the times I lost control in anger. To forgive myself for letting my marriage collapse. Forgiveness was the only way I could keep living instead of staying trapped in the spiral of hatred. New relationships. My family came back, no more judgment, just presence. My parents prepared a small room just for their grandson in their house, filled with his drawings. Quietly, they became the support system I had once lacked. My ex-husband, after undergoing individual therapy, also began to change. He no longer avoided the truth. During supervised visits, I saw him sit down and truly listen to our son. I no longer hoped for reconciliation, but at least he was learning how to be a father. The final message. One day my son asked me, "Mom, why did Grandma do that?" She said it was because she loved me. I held him tight and answered, "Some people love in the wrong way, but I'll teach you: real love means respect. No one is allowed to touch your body if you don't want them to. Not Grandma, not me, not anyone." That was the greatest lesson I wanted him to carry for life. True love always comes with respect and freedom, ending or beginning. We still carry scars on his skin and in our hearts, but those scars don't define him and they don't define me. They are simply reminders that we survived, that we dared to stand up, that we broke a cycle stretching back generations. The day he walked into preschool with a blue butterfly sticker on his neck, I smiled. He held his head high and told his classmates confidently, "This is my mark. I'm a little warrior." And I knew in the end we had won. Not won in court, not over public opinion, but over fear itself. And that is the ending of this story. Not a perfect ending, but one strong enough to open a new life, where my son will grow up believing that his body, his life, will always belong to him. The story has ended, but the journey never truly stops. My son will grow up with his warrior's mark, a small dragon on his neck, both a wound and a symbol of survival. I carry with me the memory of a battle I never chose, but one I was forced to win, because if I had fallen, my son would have lost the right to own his own body. If there is one thing I want to leave behind for anyone reading these lines, It is this: always stand by your child, even if the whole world turns its back, even if you are called crazy, hysterical, destructive. Because when the dust settles, when the voices fade, there is only one truth left: your child needs you to protect them. And sometimes protecting your child is the only way to save yourself.